Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. My name is Dr. Jeffrey Reboron, and today you will be learning about the neonatal circulatory system. In this class, you will learn how our blood, which are unoxygenated, becomes oxygenated or filled with oxygen in our lungs and how it gets distributed to the different parts of your body. But before we learn about how the process is done, we have first to learn the different parts or structures of the circulatory system that are involved in the oxygenation of blood. So, first organ that is involved in the circulatory system is our heart. So, always remember that the heart has 4 chambers. At ano-ano po yung mga 4 chambers na yon? So when we look at the heart, meron tayong tinatawag dito na right atrium, and the right atrium is situated here. Now, when we also look at the bottom of the right atrium, makikita nyo po dito na nandito po si right ventricle. Alright? So, on the other side, sa kabilang part naman ng ating puso, we also have the left atrium, which is situated here. And we also have the left ventricle, which is also situated here. Okay, so ito po si left atrium. Left atrium, left ventricle. We also have the right atrium and the right ventricle. So those po are the different chambers of the heart. Now, another organ that is involved in the circulatory system are the lungs. So as you can see, these lungs will lead to the oxygenation of our blood. So dinadagdagan niya ng oxygen yung ating dugo so that when this blood goes to the different parts of the body, they will nourish, the oxygen will be used by our muscles and other tissues or cells to get nourished. Alright. So ano pa yung mga kasama po sa ating circulatory system? We also have the different blood vessels. Yung mga blood vessels po natin, they carry either oxygenated or unoxygenated blood to the different parts of the body. So lagi po nyong tatandaan yon. Before we proceed to the process of oxygenation, medyo complicated yung diagram dito, but when you get familiar with the different colors of this diagram, mas maiintindihan nyo siya lalo. Now, when we talk about the blue blood vessels, ito po yung nagsisimbolize ng ating mga unoxygenated blood. Okay? So, lagi pong tatandaan na pag color blue po yung ating pinag-uusapan dito na blood vessel, these are unoxygenated blood. So, anong ibig pong sabihin nito? These are blood that does not contain any oxygen. Now, when we talk about the red blood vessels, ito po naman yung mga daanan ng mga dugo which are oxygenated. Okay? So, ang ibig sabihin niyan, meron na po silang oxygen. Now, let's simplify. Always remember po na yung ating katawan, our cells will use blood and oxygen so that they will become nourished para mag-function sila ng maigi. Now, imagine that your body just used a certain amount of blood and yung oxygen niya. So, ibig sabihin, yung dugong yun, wala na siyang oxygen. So, what happens is, yung dugo na unoxygenated, they have to go back to the heart and then back to the lungs para ma-oxygenate. So, dito po nagsisimula yung ating circulatory process. So, what happens is when the blood is used by the different parts of the body, including the upper extremities, yung ating ulo, and then the upper body part, and then lower body part, yung mga dugo po, they have to go back to the heart. And saan po sila dadaan? Sabi natin kanina, they will go back using the vein. Ito pong mga vein na ito po yung silang color blue. Okay. So, babalik po sila, aakyat, papunta sa taas. Okay. Now, all of these veins, okay, meron silang dadaanan na parang superhighway. And ito po yung tinatawag natin na anterior vena cava pag yung mga veins na yon ay galing sa upper part of the body. And then, pag yung mga veins naman, magmi-meet doon sa posterior vena cava. There are other books po that say na hindi siya anterior vena cava and posterior vena cava, kundi they use the term superior vena cava, okay, for the upper part of the body. And then, ang tawag naman po dito is inferior vena cava. So pareho lang po ang ibig sabihin niyan. Yung mga dugo na nanggagaling sa upper part of the body, they will go back to the heart using the superior or anterior vena cava. So dito po sila dadaan. Alright, so dito po. And then, yung mga dugo naman po which are unoxygenated na galing po sa lower part of the body, they will use the inferior or posterior vena cava, dadaan din po sila papunta dito. So, saan sila pumunta? Both blood that are unoxygenated coming from the posterior vena cava and the anterior vena cava, lahat sila pupunta po dito sa right atrium. Okay po ba? So, nandito po yung ating unoxygenated blood. Now, always remember po na meron pong dadaanan yung mga dugo natin. So, ito pong tawag natin dito is we call them the cusps. Okay. Ang tawag po natin sa cusp na naghihiwalay sa right atrium and the right ventricle is we call it the TriCospid valve. Okay. So this valve separates the right atrium and the right ventricle. So ano pong mangyayari? Pag yung dugo po, which are unoxygenated, nandito na po sila sa right atrium, pipitik yung puso. And di ba yung puso natin is ang beating niya is lub-dub. So yung lub po, yung unang pitik niya, yung atrium ang pumipitik. So what happens is, because of the beating of the heart, blood that are in the right atrium are pushed downward. Pumupunta po sila dito sa right ventricle. Okay, so yung mga dugo po na nanggaling sa ating upper part and lower part of the body, okay, yung mga dugo po na nagaling dito and then galing dito na pumunta sa right atrium, pag pumitik yung puso, ipupush yung dugo papunta sa right ventricle. So that's what happens. And then, di ba, sabi ko natin kanina, yung lub-dub. Pag pupipitik naman yung second beating ng ating puso, yun naman po yung mga ventricles ang pumipitik sa sound na yon. Okay, so what happens? Now, when the ventricles contract, yung dugo po na nandito kanina sa ating right ventricle, they will pass the pulmonary artery. Okay? Ito po yung blood vessel na nagko-connect sa ating heart papunta sa puso. Okay? So what happens? The blood gets to the pulmonary artery and then they will go now to the lungs. So pupunta po yung ating dugo sa lungs, sa ating baga. And what happens is that this blood becomes oxygenated. Okay? So anong nangyayari? Yung dugo po kanina na unoxygenated, now they become oxygenated. Okay? So nadagdagan na po ng dugo ng oxygen yung dugo. Now, after the blood gets oxygenated, so nandito na po yung dugo natin, di ba? Oxygenated na po sila, meron na silang oxygen. They will have to go back again to the heart para ma-distribute sa different parts of the body. So what happens? So ito po yon. Dadaan naman po sila sa pulmonary vein. Okay? So pulmonary vein po ang dadaanan nila going back to the heart. So dito po sila dadaan. Okay? And then here, so tatambay muna yung dugo dito sa left atrium. Okay? So, the blood which came from the lungs, dito po, and then dito, pupunta sila sa left atrium. Now, magbibit po ulit yung puso. Labdab, labdab, lab. Okay? Because of the contraction of the atria of the heart, the blood which are already oxygenated will go down to the left ventricle. At ano naman po yung dinaanan? Anong tawag natin dito? Sa cusp na ito na dinaanan ng dugo which are oxygenated, from the left atrium to the left ventricle. We call that po the bicuspid valve. Okay? So this bicuspid valve is the valve which separates the left atrium and the left ventricle. Okay po? Now, so when the blood is already in the left ventricle, okay, pipitik ulit yung mga ventricles natin, it will be expelled going to the aorta. So dito po yung aorta natin is another superhighway na dadaanan po ng ating oxygenated blood papunta sa different parts of the body using the, anong tawag natin po dito? Arteries. Okay. Ang tawag po natin sa mga blood vessels which carry oxygenated blood, we call them arteries. Okay. So, pupunta sila sa arteries and then going to the different capillaries and then distributing the blood to the different parts of the body. Ano ulit ang mangyayari sa dugo na oxygenated once they reach the cells in the different parts of the body? Yung oxygenated blood po natin will now again become unoxygenated. So that's how our circulation occurs. Okay? So I have a simplified version of this para mas madali po nating maintindihan. Kunwari, this is the upper part of the body and then this is the lower part of the body. Okay? And then ang mangyayari po is meron tayong mga tinatawag na blood vessels wherein dadaanan po ng ating mga unoxygenated blood. So babalikan lang po natin yung discussion natin kanina. And ang first na dadaanan nila, if the body just used the oxygen, ang dadaanan po nilang vein ay, ang tawag natin doon is, okay, superior vena cava if it comes from the upper part of the body, at inferior vena cava naman po if it comes from the lower part of the body. So ito po yun. Here and here. Okay, ulitin ko ha. This one and this one. Next, after po na dumaan yung superior and inferior vena cava, yung dugo, after po dumaan doon, magmimit po sila sa iisang chamber ng puso. At ang tawag po natin doon is the right atrium. Okay? Yung right atrium po natin, makikita natin dito. Okay, so like I said, inferior vena cava, superior vena cava, unoxygenated blood pupunta po dito. Okay. So after po nilang pumunta sa right atrium, the next thing that will happen is that the blood from the right atrium will pass through the, dito po, TriCospid valve, ditong parte. Dadaan siya dito. So sulat natin. Blood will pass the tricuspid valve and then they will now go to the right ventricle. Okay po ba yun? So, nandito na po tayo sa right ventricle. At saan siya makikita? Dito. Now, after the ventricles contract, yun pong dugo is dadaan sa pulmonary artery and then magdi-divide siya going to the left and the right lungs. Okay. So what will happen? Yung unoxygenated blood po from the right ventricle, pareho silang dadaan sa pulmonary artery. Okay? And then, yung isa pupunta sa right lung. Okay? And yung pangalawa naman is pupunta sila sa left lung. Okay. Now, what will happen to the unoxygenated blood when they go to the lungs? Ang gagawin nila is both of them will become now oxygenated. So, the blood that goes to the lungs will now oxygenate the blood. Okay? Now, kailangan po nilang bumalik sa puso. At ano yung gagamitin nila? They will use the pulmonary vein. Okay, babalik po sila sa puso using the pulmonary vein. So, saan po makikita yung pulmonary vein? Nandito po sila. Okay? So, from here, dito, di ba? Right ventricle, papunta dito. And then, oxygenation dito. Babalik sila dito using the pulmonary vein. And both blood which comes from the left and right lobes of the lungs, pupunta po sila dito sa left atrium. Okay? So, saan po natin? Okay, babalik po sila dito sa puso and then sa left atrium. Okay, gets po ba? Okay? Now, when the blood is already in the left atrium, dadaan din siya ulit sa, tawag natin po dito po. Anong tawag natin ulit dito sa structure na to? It's called the bicuspid valve. So, dadaan po siya sa bicuspid valve. Papunta naman po sa right ventricle. So, yung dugo from the lungs will go to the pulmonary artery, left atrium, and then going down to the left ventricle. Dito po. Okay? So, nandun na po siya, yung dugo sa left ventricle. Okay. So, pag nandun na po sila sa left ventricle, what will happen? Dadaan po ulit sila sa aorta. All the blood that are oxygenated will go to the aorta to be distributed to the different parts of the body. Okay. Okay, using ang tawag natin dito naman, arteries. Okay. And then they will go to the upper and lower parts of the body. And then the oxygen will now become consumed. So, magiging unoxygenated na po ulit yung ating dugo. So, that's what happens po in the circulatory system of the neonate. Actually, ito din po yung ginagamit natin na circulatory system. Okay, so ulitin po natin ha, before we end our video, let's again try to trace how our blood moves from our veins to the heart going to the lungs. So ulitin po natin. Unoxygenated blood that comes from both upper and lower extremities will go back to the heart using the veins at dadaan po sila sa superior vena cava pag upper parts of the body, and then yung iba naman po is dadaan sa inferior vena cava pag lower parts of the body. Both of them will go to the right atrium. Okay. Now, when the heart contracts, the atria of the heart will push the blood from the right atrium going to the right ventricle, passing the TriCospid valve. So, from the right atrium, dadaan sa TriCospid valve going to the right ventricle. Now, when the heart again contracts, the blood from the right ventricle will go to the pulmonary artery. So, dadaan po siya dito. And then, it gets divided into two. Yung iba pupunta sa right, yung iba pupunta sa left lung. And then, the blood will now become oxygenated. Okay? So, yung oxygenated blood po natin, they will have to go back to the heart passing the pulmonary vein. So dito po sila pupunta pareho. So both oxygenated blood from the right and the left will now go to the left atrium. Okay, so when the blood that is oxygenated is in the left atrium at pipitik yung puso, what happens is the blood that is in the left atrium will go down to the left ventricle, pero kailangan niya munang dumaan sa bicuspid valve. Okay po ba? So left atrium, pupunta sa left ventricle, passing the bicuspid valve. Next, what happens? When the ventricles contract, yung dugo po that are in the left ventricle will also go to the aorta to be distributed to both upper and lower parts of the body using the arteries. Okay? And then again, pag pumunta na sila sa different parts of the body, yung dugo po na oxygenated will now become unoxygenated. Okay? And then, dadaan po sila again sa veins, papunta sa inferior and superior vena cava, pupunta sila sa left atrium. And the cycle, right atrium, sorry. And then the cycle goes on and on and on. So, yun lamang po ang lesson natin for today. And then, on our next video, I will also show you how the fetal circulation looks like so that you will better understand our next topic. So I hope that you remember and take this lesson by heart so that when we proceed to our next topic, which is the fetal circulation, ay mas madali nyo po silang maalala or maintindihan. So again, maraming salamat po for listening and have a good day. So those po are the different chambers of the heart.